So one of the things that we determined we were pretty good at with the laser guided rockets was going against ISIS checkpoints. So ISIS had set up quite a few checkpoints around the city, and due to our standoff with the laser guided rockets, as well as our ability to shoot multiple rockets with certain spacing, and our ability to reattack quickly, um, we were able to take out checkpoints on a regular basis. Um, Usually we would, our first salvo would be two. So we would shoot two at a checkpoint. We would assess the damage. If there were any personnel or vehicles that left, we would quickly reattack and take those out. Um, so I don't think we'll ever really know, what ISIS thought of our checkpoint destruction, but it all happened pretty quickly and it was pretty violent.
Hanky, welcome back to 10% True. It's good to see you again.
That's great to be back.
So, Hanky, you have a very distinguished fan in the form of my sister. I didn't tell you this before we hit record, but fans of the channel will perhaps recognize you as having come on and talked about your time flying the F-14 and the Super Hornet.
Awesome.
As a Rio. One of the pictures you provided me was you on the carrier deck in front of the Super Hornet with just an amazing moustache. She screen grabbed it. And I think at the time I was growing a moustache when our episode was coming out. And she screen grabbed it and she said to me, "Now that is a moustache." So, Debs, if you're listening, I hope I haven't embarrassed you too much. But there we go.
That's great to hear. My wife put the veto on the mustache a few years back. So
did she? Okay. Well, it's probably not a bad thing, but it definitely suited you. So anyway,
awesome.
that's by the by. The way that people look is not part of the interest of this channel. What is part of the interest of this channel is the light attack program. So this is episode 3 of what will probably end up being a 6-part episode for light attack. If you're listening to this and you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll put some links in the description. Go and listen to part 1 and part 2. In summary, we've had Starbase Pachuca talking about his time in South America, Iraq, Afghanistan, building an understanding for the Air Force as to what would make for a good light attack program or a good light attack platform, what it is that the warfighter needs in terms of support from the air. And then at the end of the last episode, Starbaby talked a little bit about Combat Dragon 2 and how he had birthed the idea of this light attack aircraft that the Air Force could use. But regrettably, he had to leave, or that was taken away from him before he got to see it go through to fruition. So, Hanky, you're going to tell us about that. You'll tell us the history and your involvement in it. But before we do that, just for the audience at home, if you're listening to this on Spotify, please like it, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment or a review of the channel if you enjoy it, because that will help to grow my audience on the Spotify platform. And if you're on YouTube, just share it and make sure that this story gets out to as many people as possible. I'd appreciate that. Okay, so Hanky, tell us a little bit about the background then for Combat Dragon. I've got an awful background because it didn't fit, but that is a Bronco. We did talk in our previous interview about the fact that you flew the Bronco. We teased the idea you might come back and describe what that experience was like. This is the moment to do that. So, what was Combat Dragon 2, and how did you get involved in it?
Sure thing. Yes. First, Steve, thanks for having me back. It's great to have the opportunity to come and talk about what I think was one of the highlights of my career. Definitely one of the most interesting things I did. I joined the Combat Dragon 2 program in December of 2014. I was basically at the right place in the right time for my Navy career. I was looking to move back to Virginia Beach from California with my family. And this opportunity presented itself where they were looking for someone with my level of experience who is a forward air controller airborne or a FAC-A to join what was then a team of 3 aviators. I was going to be the 4th to get this program, this Combat Dragon 2 program, overseas for a combat demonstration. The background very quickly prior to my joining the program was the Navy with some special operations interest as well as interest from CENTCOM, was able to acquire two OV-10 Broncos from NASA that were currently at NASA Langley, which is located pretty close to Virginia Beach. It's actually up in Hampton, Virginia. So through the Space Act, they were able to more or less borrow these OV-10 Broncos and outfit them with equipment that would give them essentially a modern light attack capability with a focus on supporting special operations. In between 2012 through, I believe, the early part of 2014, they conducted something that they referred to as a limited objective experiment. So they received funding. I don't remember the dollar value, but essentially they received funding to send the two Broncos up to Pax River to a NavAir facility where they were modified to include quite a bit of equipment, which we can talk about a little bit further in the discussion. So they were modified. They were used in training exercises throughout the United States, primarily in 2013. And once the limited objective experiment, or LOE, was concluded, what they determined was, hey, this is all great information. However, a combat demonstration would really, fill things out as far as what this capability can bring. So through some funding that became available, as well as support from primarily CENTCOM at some fairly high levels in the organization, the funding was made available for continued modifications that would make the aircraft suitable in a combat role. History or current events, depending on your perspective, also plays a big part in this. And without, I believe it was the summer of 2014, I could be wrong, but that's when ISIS really became a factor in northern Iraq and spread very, very quickly. So current events provided an opportunity and a sense of urgency among all the folks involved to say, hey, we have these aircraft, we have funding, and we have a war that would be suitable to test them in. So that's what we did.
When we were talking before we hit record, you did explain to me that you weren't there initially when the Navy effectively took on the Combat Dragon 2 program. Mm-hmm. You were there prior to the deployment and the workup, and of course you deployed and flew the aeroplane. So this may not be a question you have intimate knowledge of, but do you know what broadly the requirements were? What was it that they wanted? I mean, I've read previously it had to be an ejection seat equipped aeroplane.
Yep.
2 seats. Did it have to have 2 engines? Do you know what the briefing was?
Sure. So, big picture, just making sure we keep everything unclassified here, is the difference. The modifications that needed to be made to the aircraft for it to deploy in combat, just like you mentioned, were the ejection seats and then a survivability suite. So that survivability suite that they integrated was primarily in 2 systems. The first being an AAR-47, which is essentially a missile warning receiver. So we could receive indications of AAA fire, indications of surface-to-air threats being launched at us, due to the fact that those were the primary threats in theater at the time. So a detection capability in the form of that system and a protection or a way to defeat those. And that was going to be through the integration of an ALE-47 system, which is similar to, it was the same the same box that I had in the back of a Tomcat. But that ALE-47 countermeasure system included a mix of flares to include dim, bright, and kinematic that we would, if we were shot at, then we would be able to effectively defeat what we assess to be the threat, surface to air, or the man-pad systems that were in theater at the time. So by integrating that and having the ejection seats, we were essentially certified fit to deploy into a combat zone.
Okay. Can you explain what a kinematic flare is?
Absolutely. So a kinematic flare is a forward firing flare. So for all those familiar, you have an aircraft flying, uh, you know, relatively high speeds, obviously, and any flares are going to be deployed, just fired out of the aircraft, and they're going to fall away. Well, modern threat systems, the standard game of cat and mouse with trying to defeat our countermeasures or countermeasures, if you will. The kinematic flare comes into play where if you have a threat system that has a flare rejection capability, so it can say, "Hey, I see that that's falling away from the aircraft. I'm going to ignore that, and I'm going to focus on, the heat from the engine." This kinematic flare will actually go forward to defeat any sort of countermeasure system that a seeker head of a threat missile may have.
Wow. So does it fit into a standard ALE-47 launcher? Then it comes out and then and flies itself forward.
It does. So I don't, full disclosure, I don't remember the exact specifics of it, but essentially it has some design where it's going to fire out and then fire forward for a brief period of time.
Wow. Okay. Very
Yeah.
interesting. Okay. So that's a significant change to the airplane. So you've got their OV-10D pluses, I think, that NASA has. They've loaned it to you, haven't they? You've not
Yes.
sequestered it or anything. Okay, so it's been loaned to you. You're turning it into an OV-10G plus, I think is the
Yes.
designation for it. So what else is different about the airplane? I think you had different radios and
Yes,
various other
absolutely.
changes.
So what we were able to do is we were able to put in four Harris PRC 117G radios, two of which were connected to antennas on the top of the aircraft, which gave us SATCOM capability. And then two of them were connected to antennas on the lower side of the aircraft with special antennas that we were able to talk to ground forces in the lower FM range of a UHF frequency band. And obviously, SATCOM and those radios would have secure capability. So having four radios in the aircraft was fantastic. Another incredible modification that was made was the addition of a KU band satellite antenna. So we were able to transmit and receive video and data back to any command center really around the world, just due to the fact that it was a satellite antenna. So that was pretty incredible. One big modification, which was just a commercial off the shelf, was the integration of a Garmin GTN 620 system. So we essentially had a glass cockpit for navigation and safety of flight. And that system was completely separate from any of the mission systems that we had in the aircraft. What that allowed us to do was to update things without affecting our certified safety of flight information. I can keep going. There's a couple more that are pretty cool. We had a mission system, which we borrowed from another special operations platform. Basically, think of it as like a moving map with a lot of cool things that we were able to integrate. We put a MX-15 EO/IR HD capable camera pod that was mounted under the nose of the aircraft. And we also integrated a Scorpion helmet mounted cueing system, which was a similar system that they have in, I believe it is the A10. So it's not the type of helmet that I was accustomed to flying in the F-18, where all of your head movements are magnetically tracked. We actually put little stickers on the top of the canopy, and they would be the helmet mounted system would build basically a constellation, if you will, with the camera looking up. And then if you turned your head, it knew you turned your head. If you looked down, it knew you looked down. And it would use a lot of very advanced math for us to be able to use that helmet mounted cueing system. And instead of it being a visor that came over your face like in the F-18, it was a monocle that you would just clip onto your helmet with your NVG bracket and just click it down. And you just had a monocle over your right eye. that you were able to see stuff. And that integrated with our mission system as well as the MX-15, which gave us just incredible capability of being to look out and visually see where our sensor or the MX-15 was looking. And then I had a moving map that I could look and see where my sensor was looking, where my helmet was looking. It was pretty awesome.
Wow. I think
Yeah,
the A10C does have the Scorpion. I think one of the things they can do with it is they can, maybe in the same way as you're describing, they can look out and they can see steer points. Well, the steer point, they can see waypoint, they can see. I think they call it the cake or the wedding cake. It's like an inverted sort of, well, it's like a pyramidal type symbol that
hmm
shows where the target is and that kind of stuff, the sensor point of interest, that sort of thing. Was your implementation as sophisticated as that?
it was.
Yeah.
So we were able to designate targets. We were able to designate multiple targets, and all of that would translate into something that we could visually see through the Scorpion.
Wow. So when you got to the aeroplane, then how well integrated, how bug free, how how nicely did this stuff all play together? Was the airplane fairly
Sure.
mature and well functioned?
So when I showed up, it was probably 80% there. I joined the team when they were at Pax River going through the final modifications. So I was there for about 3 months as they finished everything up. So all the integrations of the systems, we were even mechanical or engine related work was done as well. So I did that for about 3 months, continuing to work on getting everything up to speed. Um, what I'll follow up with that once the aircraft were ready to go and they passed all their inspections, we flew them to just a civilian airfield in Tennessee, where the folks who had designed that mission system I was telling you about, we called it Poseidon. Um, we spent about 2 weeks in Tennessee where they came out to the aircraft and we really worked through all the bugs between the helmet, the mission software system, where we would basically get airborne. We would have a test card that we would go through to make sure everything worked. And if there were little tweaks that needed to be made, we would land. The engineers would hook up their computer to our system. They would make the changes, and we would go do it again. So we were able to iterate about as quick as you could imagine with this mission system. But walking out of that, we were ready to start our pre-deployment workups.
Okay. You talked right at the beginning about how you had a set of skills that they were looking for that suited
Mhm.
you to this role, made you suitable for this role. And in our last interview, you talked about doing
Mhm.
FAC-A in the. I think you were talking about doing it in the bomb catch in the
Mhm.
F-14 rather than the F-18, and you had described some of those missions. What were you thinking then when you looked at this OV-10, this very heavily modified OV-10? Were you thinking you were going to have to dramatically change the way that you had done business previously? Were you thinking there were some new things that you would be able to do? Was it just going to be the same but in a different platform? How were you anticipating things were going to go when you did eventually deploy?
Sure. No, that's a great question. The the short answer was I didn't really know what to expect. The good thing though is that with all the training that we had and an understanding of the system, once we were trained up, I had more capability than I did in a Super Hornet, specifically for the mission that we were looking to do. Without disparaging the Super Hornet, um, it was more of us. The Super Hornet, we had the tools we were given, but um, our primary air to ground sensor was the AT FLIR, and on the F-14 it was the Lantern pod. Now those are targeting pods. However, based on the missions that we were giving, we were being asked to use those targeting pods as essentially an ISR pod, and it was not designed to be an ISR pod. The MX-15 was designed to be an ISR pod, and it had targeting capability in it. So having a pod that was specifically designed for the mission we were doing was great. The altitudes we were flying at were lower than you would see in a Tomcat or a Super Hornet. So the fidelity with these HD, EO, and IR sensors was leaps and bounds beyond what I'd seen. So that piece of it was incredible. Um, the muscle memory obviously was different because everything was added on, but we trained quite a bit to be able to remember where everything was, work crew coordination with the pilot, so that we were able to accomplish those missions. The having the background of those mission sets. I mean, close air support. The procedures don't change if you're in an OV-10, an F-35, a Tomcat, an A-10. You know the procedures. So I think having that background of knowing the procedures helped. And then we just had to learn a new system, which I found to be incredibly capable for what we were asked to do.
I think you may get into this, when you describe going to combat in the aeroplane, so you don't have to answer it straight away. But one of the things that you said to me last time we talked, I talked to you about. I don't know if it was sort of explicitly around tactics, but I'd said to you, how do you do CAS in a Super Hornet or a Tomcat? And one of the things that you talked about, because I was asking you about the manpad threat, coming in doing shows of force, and one of the things you said is speed. Just go fast, go really, really
Sure.
fast. So when you looked at the OV-10, obviously it doesn't have that capability. It's a turboprop aeroplane. It's not
Right.
built to go fast. That's not the purpose of it. I understand that. Were you looking at that with any misgivings? Were you thinking, especially because ISIS was beginning to ramp up in Iraq, and then ISIS by 2016, I think when you were actually out there, in Syria was, extremely hot. There were, were you looking at the platform and thinking, I'd be more comfortable if it were fast?
So it wasn't really much of a concern, primarily because the visibility that we had in the platform, as well as the countermeasure system, which I had talked about earlier. So by having so in the F-14 and the F-18, we did not have a missile alert warning system for manpads or AAA or anything like that. What we did have was a system to detect radar guided air to air or air to ground missiles in the form of a radar warning receiver. So um, just like I had said previously, hey, staying high, staying fast is going to protect you against manpads. You stay out of the envelope where they would be shooting. Now that we were in the manpad envelope, we did have a system which would warn us. We had very good visibility, and we had a very good countermeasures package in the ALE 47 to defeat any of those threats. So we had pretty high confidence that our survivability was high based on those factors.
Okay. Can I just ask you to talk a bit more about the MX-15? One of the things that you just said
Sure.
a few moments ago was that it was designed as an ISR tool. It had inbuilt targeting capability. I think you've already sort of hinted maybe, or maybe this is an explicit description, but you talked about high definition picture, EO and IR picture. What else was it about the MX-15 that makes it ISR oriented? What sort of characteristics are you looking for in a good ISR system then?
Sure. The primary one is going to be the picture fidelity. So, for example, and again, this is just very broad brush, but in an F-18, from the altitudes that we fly at, I can tell you the difference between a sedan and a truck. I can tell you if it's a person or an animal. Again, altitude dependent. However, there were situations where, again, depending on the zoom setting that you have, if you don't have anything to compare and contrast it to, for example, if there were 10 humans playing, or 10 humans playing soccer, walking down the street, without any comparison, I wouldn't be able to tell you if those were kids or if those were adults. And it would only be if an adult was there, I could say, okay, that person is twice as tall. I can tell that on my Lantern Pod or my AT FLIR, but without that comparison, I won't know. With the MX-15 and the combination of both EO and IR, I can tell you definitively it's a child or an adult. I can tell you uh, probably if they're carrying a shovel or a rifle. Um, I could tell you the model of the car as opposed to it's a sedan or it's a truck. Just an incredible difference in the fidelity of that pod. One additional factor, and this just happened to be where it was mounted on the OV10, with it being mounted under the nose of the aircraft, we did not suffer from masking. So in a Tomcat or a Hornet, based on where that pod is mounted, you have to fly a very specific pattern to maintain positive identification or PID on whatever it is you're looking at. With the pod mounted under the nose of the OV10, we did not have any masking. So we were able to basically have a, relatively speaking, 360-degree field of view for wherever we were flying. And that gave us a lot more flexibility in the patterns that we would fly over a target area.
Okay. Did you have I mean, these are very nerdy questions, but the audience,
Sure.
I'm interested in them, so that's why I
Yeah.
asked them, but I think the audience probably is interested in them too. Did you have the same sort of sensor fusion, let's say, in that MX-15 as you did with the helmet-mounted sight? Could you, if you were panning left and right, would it show symbology to show you where, a waypoint was or a sensor point of interest was, or?
Yes.
Okay.
So we did. The getting a little bit more into the weeds of it, though, with the system being, a constellation that it's mapped to, one of the things we always had to keep in mind was errors induced in the system. So let's say you were aligning it when you were taxiing down a bumpy runway, your alignment may not be as good as it would be in an F-18 parked on an aircraft carrier with a magnetic mapping that takes place with your alignment of that helmet. And the way we were able to overcome that was, as part of our procedures, once we were airborne, we would, the Wizzo or the guy in the back would designate something with the MX-15, and then the pilot in the front would be able to look down and say, okay, I know you're designated on the northernmost building on the west side of a road. And it was something prominent that we could do routinely. And then he would see where that symbol was in relation to the pod being there. So we knew the pod was tight. If he said, hey, it looks like my symbol is about 100 meters away, he's then going to realign it to tighten up the alignment of that helmet. But we would not primarily employ off of what I'll just call a helmet designation. And I've got a really good vignette on this for later to discuss. But that helmet mounted cueing system is good to get you in the general direction or the general area of a threat or a point of interest. And then you're going to use that MX-15 to refine it to a targetable solution, something you would employ weapons on.
There's two directions I want to take this in. One is about the weapons,
Sure.
but one is around the mission. I think I should do mission, and we probably come back to weapons when you talk about going into combat, because I know you had some interesting weapons on the aeroplane. Mm-hmm. Can we talk a little bit about mission then?
Sure.
This is a series on light attack, so we know that you're supposed to have a kinetic capability in this aeroplane. Mm-hmm. Seems to me just from the pictures that I've seen that it's quite lightly loaded. You're not a bomb truck or anything like that. You talked about there being special operations interest in the aeroplane, which and in our first interview you said that you worked with special operations. So I think it's a given. We know that there are probably going to be things that you can't say about it. But what can you say about the mission of the aeroplane, and what can you say about the customers and working with them before you deployed, or whether or not you did work with them?
Sure. Yeah. So we absolutely we worked with the customers that we were going to be supporting, and from a very broad brush, what I can talk about is, it was a CENTCOM sponsored experiment. So we worked in the CENTCOM AOR, or area of responsibility, and the folks that would fall under that is really kind of the big thing as far as the customer goes. The mission. Again, very broad brush. Our mission was to be able to provide, find, fix, and finish capability all in a single platform. So if we received, offboard information saying, hey, we think that there might be some bad guys here, or we want to get, sensors in there, we would do that. We would gather intelligence, on the target with the sensors that we had on board, and then based on either the ROE or commander's intent, we would then potentially employ on those targets. When we were in training, we trained to a very broad mission set. When we were deployed, it was a little bit more focused, primarily just on disrupting and degrading ISIS in northern Iraq was the primary mission.
Okay. So something came into my head while you were describing that, and it's probably an inappropriate comparison to make, and you'll maybe slap me down for doing it, but I'll ask anyway. I think about, I mean, so we're talking about well over 10 years ago. Well, 10 years ago, let's say, we're talking about a decade ago. But I think about now Reaper drones flying out. They're armed with a Hellfire. They can be armed with GBU-12. They obviously don't have a rocket capability. I don't think they have a rocket capability, but like you did with the Bronco. But what is the difference then between a Reaper doing high, a long term or multi-hour droning around the sky over Iraq with a really good sensor suite? One person driving it in a trailer, one person doing the nav in a trailer, one person doing weapons systems in the trailer, then being able to talk to everybody. What's the difference between that then and something like what you were doing with the OV-10G?
Sure. Yeah, no, great question. And I think that's, having the benefit of hindsight, with this being 10 years ago, drone technology has only gotten better. And I think unmanned systems is definitely an area that we seem to be trending. What I will say is that one of the things that made us different from, the unmanned suite of platforms in 2015 was our ability to forward deploy. So while we ended up just sticking in one place, our concept of operations and what we trained to was the ability to forward deploy. All we really needed was a dirt airstrip, and you had the ability to co-locate us with forward deployed forces, whether that would be partner countries, whether that would be regular Army, Marines, special operations, whatever it is. And through training and through practice, one thing that we found to be true is that if you're able to train day in and day out with guys on the ground and having the air crew co-located with them, you're eating in the same chow hall, you're going to the same briefings, you're seeing the same intelligence reports. There is a synergy that can be built there where for some of these missions, knowing who the guy is in a light attack aircraft is really an extension of the ground force commander and his team. So that, I think, really is what we were trying to show, is that co-location with forward deployed forces, direct integration with those forces and direct support to those forces makes a big difference. If it's an MQ-9, it's very likely that the person operating that system is on the other side of the world. And sure, you're going to get a briefing and you're going to get potentially mission rehearsal. You're going to get, and you're going to know your procedures, but you don't know who that person necessarily is. You haven't maybe regularly trained with them. So that I think is what we brought to the fight. One other thing I'll add, I think an advantage of having a platform like this with just incredible visibility. The visibility in an OV-10 is phenomenal. With our ability to see the broader battle space, it gave us certain advantages in certain theaters that we trained to or prepared to go to. Specifically, let's say we were flying over an area supporting a ground mission, and we are able to see headlights 30 miles away on a highway. That's something that we can report to the ground force commander and say, hey, we're seeing headlights pretty far away. Are you expecting anyone to come from that direction? And if he says, actually, we're not, nobody should be coming this way, then we have the ability to say, okay, well, we're going to go check that out and report back to you and let you know what it is. A drone is looking through a soda straw from a trailer on the other side of the world, directly supporting that mission. So we thought that we would be able to provide much more situational awareness with that incredible visibility, with two heads in the cockpit, scanning for threats just outside that of our sensors.
Okay. So just to ask just one more question around the training piece, then. Uh, as you've already described, the aeroplane, was pretty, well put together by the time you got there. You said it was about 80% integration done, and then you
Mhm.
went and finished that off. What other things did you do before you deployed to make sure that when you did get into theater, you were ready?
Yeah, absolutely. So we spent about 6 weeks out in Fallon, Nevada, where the Navy has a very large training base located out there. They've also got a pretty awesome weapons depot, and we were able to shoot 50 caliber ammunition from our gun pod. We probably shot 2 or 3 pallets of unguided 275-inch rockets, and we actually shot a decent number of 5-inch rockets as part of our close air support forward air control qualification in the aircraft. So we did all that based out of Fallon. Probably one of the most interesting things we did for training was we developed our own syllabus to prove to leadership, hey, we have the ability to operate these things from a dirt airstrip. And approximately 50 miles as the crow flies to the southeast of Naval Air Station Fallon is a dirt airstrip called Gabbs Airfield. And I believe I sent you some pictures of the aircraft parked at Gabbs Airfield. So what we did is we forward deployed to Gabbs for 2 weeks, where we set up all our facilities. We had our comms team set up comms. We, brought all of our own food. We brought all of our own tents, basically as if we were forward deployed. So we brought the aircraft out to Gabbs Airfield, and our qualification syllabus was really okay. Let's do this during the day. So we did dirt landings during the day. Then we moved on to night. Then we moved on to lights out, NVGs only landings on a dirt airstrip at night to get the pilots that we had proficient and qualified to do that if we were asked to when we were overseas. As part of that, we also got some advanced medical training, as well as navigation training, and kind of think of it as like a master's degree in skills we learned in Boy Scouts, so that the team that we had could essentially be a self-sustaining forward deployed team for a period of time.
Okay. And you've got two aeroplanes. That's the extent of it, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Okay. What are you finding then before you deploy the mission capable rate of the airplane being? How often does it break, in other words?
Sure. So the airplane itself is extremely rugged. I'll actually split the question into two parts if that's okay. We'll call it the airframe and its flyability, and then the mission systems stability. So the airframe flyability itself was incredible. With regular maintenance, the aircraft could fly, hundreds of hours before needing to go in for any higher level of maintenance. We had our engines. We sent the aircraft out to California, where Cal Fire has some of the smartest guys in the world who work on those engines for their department, and they basically went through, tip to tail, if you will, on the engines, getting them in as good a shape as we could. So that was going to keep us flying basically through workups and through deployments. You know, don't call me on it, but I want to say they were rated at that point for like 1,000 or maybe 1,500 hours each before they needed to go in for a higher level maintenance. The airframe itself, extremely rugged. It's a very well designed system, from generations ago to be very robust and have a decent amount of redundancy. So one thing that was interesting is the hydraulic system, unlike in a modern fighter, which is a 3,000 or 5,000 psi constantly pressurized system. The hydraulic system in the OV-10 is an on-demand hydraulic system. So it is not running unless you are lowering the gear, unless you are doing anything else that may require the use of hydraulics. So the nice thing there is, because it's not pressurized all the time, it's not going to leak potentially, or through metal fatigue or whatever it is. And if it does, then it's a relatively easy fix because it doesn't have to be pressurized to those specifications, but there's always a backup. We were able to gravity lower the gear. We had electric backups for some other systems. So having a rugged system as well as redundancy built in gave us pretty good capability when it came to the airframe itself. On our deployment, we were what I would call 99% sortie completion rate. The only time we had one of the aircraft go down was to have a fuel pump replaced in one of the aircraft. So I think we lost one mission, and then what we were able to do is we just double cycled the one up aircraft to cover uh, our um, our ISR windows that we had been tasked with, and we were able to get that part shipped from the United States. And that aircraft, I think it was 6 or 7 days when it was back up. But we had it, we kind of went through a list of stuff before. Hey, what are things that we're going to need to have replaced? Tires, certain pumps, certain computer systems. That fuel pump was something that we weren't expecting. And like I said, we were able to get it in about a week.
Where did you get it from?
I believe we got it from Cal Fire.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So the other funny thing is that the aircraft could have flown fine without the fuel pump. In fact, the OV-10As did not have this fuel pump. It was all just gravity fuel into the feed tank. But the OV-10D, because it did have the fuel pump, if it failed, the aircraft was down. So I think if we had been in extremis and we had to have both of those aircraft for a high risk mission, we may have made the decision to fly it. But because per the maintenance, it wasn't in an up status, we had to fix it.
Okay. What about the
So
mission systems then? How robust were they?
yeah, mission systems were pretty reliable. However, because they're computers, because they were in a hot environment, overheating was definitely a concern. So um, we had a couple extra mission systems that we had ready to go, and those were just computer racks that we would load into the cargo bay of the OV-10. Luckily, we were able to test some of the displays that we used ahead of time, and we're able to pick ones that were extremely rugged, and we didn't have any reliability issues when we were on deployment with those. But yeah, definitely having backup computers helped us out a couple of times.
Okay.
So,
are you at this point writing or formalizing the objectives? Because this is, I don't want to mislabel this, but this isn't really a proof of concept. But this is not something you've already described it as. I think you said a limited operational evaluation or experiment (LOE). So this is never supposed to really go anywhere. This Combat Dragon 2 thing. It's supposed to set the scene maybe for Combat Dragon 3 or for what comes in the future, and to help the Air Force or the Navy or civilian leaders figure out what to do with their money, right? So, but are you writing down a list of objectives that you want to achieve, or are you just going to go out and fly combat and then write it all down at the end and see what you end up with?
Sure. So the list of objectives that we had came from CENTCOM, and the team prior to my arrival, and then once I was there and we went on the combat deployment, continued to evaluate those. So without going through the complete laundry list, we were we had a checklist that said, hey, is this something you experienced in combat? And we were able to achieve those objectives.
Okay. So now might be a good opportunity then to tell us a little bit about the weapons. I mean, presumably you had to qualify on new weapons before you went out to combat. The guided rocket, I guess, is the most interesting one. What was that? How did it work? How good was it? How easy was it to use?
Sure. So the primary weapon that we used was the APKWS anti uh, sorry uh, something precision kill weapon system. I've probably got it written down somewhere. I'm just blanking on it right now. But essentially, what it was a 275-inch rocket where you unscrewed the warhead and you put on a guidance kit between the warhead and the rocket motor. So, what that weapon does is when it's fired from the rocket tube, it deploys four laser sensors out of that guidance kit. And then it essentially finds the laser energy and uses the fins on the guidance kit itself to guide that rocket to its target. So the thing that I found most impressive about that is you're able to take something that has been in the US inventory for, at least since the 60s in an unguided capacity and through the use of modern technology, make it a precision weapon with extremely low CDE, low collateral damage uh, effects.
Hmm.
So you're really able to target something specifically without, much lower collateral damage issues than you would have with, say, a 500-pound bomb, even a guided bomb like a GBU-12 or a JDAM.
Hmm.
So really gave incredible precision to a pre-existing weapon. Um, and that was what we used primarily in theater as our primary weapon system. The other weapon that we carried in theater was a 50 cal gun pod capable of 400 rounds, and then we carried an additional pod that carried more flares for that survivability piece that we talked about earlier.
Okay.
Um, one interesting story, and this is you know hindsight being what it is, we're a little bit frustrated. But while we were in Pax River, we were running out of time to make it into theater. And our plan was to flight test a 250-pound guided munition, uh, basically, a combination of a JDAM and a laser guided weapon. So there was a test plan to do that. However, due to how long it was going to take and when they wanted us to be in theater, the team had to make a decision whether we were going to get flight clearance for that weapon or for the 50 cal. At the time, the customer said, "Hey, we would rather have 50 cal capability," so we shelved the bomb capability. Current events changed, and by the time we got in theater, there were some restrictions which sort of took the 50 cal out of the game, unfortunately. So, if I could get in my time machine and go back to December of 2014, I would have said, "Hey, let's get the 250-pound bombs tested instead of the 50 cal." But we had to do what we had to do at the time. We did what we did with the best information available. Things had just changed by the time we got into theater.
I can't remember the weight class for it, but are you talking about something like small diameter bomb?
So it's different than a small diameter bomb. It's actually, I believe, the nomenclature is a GBU uh, or a Mark 81 bomb body.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So an 82 is a 500-pounder.
Correct.
Okay,
83 is 1,000. 84 is 2,000. But yeah, a Mark 81 is a 250-pound bomb body in that same family.
Wow. Okay. So you've already hinted at the fact that you couldn't use the gun, which
Right.
well, maybe you'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute when you describe taking the airplane to combat. But can I just ask you about weapon effects for a 2.75 inch? Is it a Zuni? Is that what it's called, or is a Zuni a different thing?
So the Zuni is actually the 5-inch rocket.
Okay.
And we were able to shoot some Zuni rockets in training. They had some out in Fallon, and those things are pretty incredible. Bigger warhead, obviously, longer burn motor. However, there was no corresponding laser guidance kit to a 5-inch rocket that existed, whereas there was with the 275-inch rocket.
Okay.
So obviously, because it didn't really exist, we opted to go with the 275-inch rocket.
What can that do then? I mean, I'm imagining anti-personnel, obviously, as a use
Right.
case. Can it take out lightly skinned vehicles? What's its application?
So the primary application was personnel and lightly skinned vehicles, or relatively small buildings. It wouldn't be a weapon that we would use as like a target penetrator based on just the warheads that we were carrying at the time.
Okay. So final question before maybe
Mhm.
I ask you to tell us about the deployment itself. But what were you expecting threat-wise then? You've described manpads, you've talked about the
Mhm.
survivability of the aeroplane and having confidence in that. We know the customers predominantly they're going to be special forces, so you're not talking about full frontal assaults with infantry against
Mhm.
a town or a city, whatever. It's going to be presumably very sort of limited and specialist in the way it works. What are you expecting the threat to be? What are you expecting to see when you get out there? Or what are you expecting to be doing?
Sure. So at the time, ISIS pretty much controlled all of northern Iraq. And what one of the things that, as far as some of the information that we had available at the time, is that civilians had fled a lot of these smaller towns, and ISIS had essentially created, their own territory um, surrounding Mosul the whole way into Syria. So they really did control northern Iraq at the time. Um, Based on the intelligence assessments that we had to be prepared for um, mostly, shoulder fired surface to air missiles that they could get from Syria to Iraq. So when you look at the gamut of things that they have in Syria that could be smuggled in, we assumed that we needed to be able to counter that. Um, there were also a lot of AAA or air defense artillery pieces that they had modified. So we expected AAA, we expected man pads. So due to that, we essentially maintain an altitude sanctuary a little bit higher than we would have if we didn't assess those threats to exist.
Yeah. And now one more question before I ask you
Sure,
about
sure.
to tell us about the combat deployment itself. And this is a question I ask guests fairly regularly, but I think it's appropriate to ask at this point, and that is about your personal feelings about going up against ISIS. And
Mhm.
so you have flown combat before,
Mhm.
and against, let's say, a more gentlemanly enemy. I mean, the
Mhm.
Iraqi forces could be bad, but Saddam Hussein was, he had some standards. Let's say ISIS
Mhm.
have no standards. ISIS
Right.
are you're going to be starring in your own internet video if you get caught by these guys.
Right.
So you previously had, and it's interesting you described that you had this radar warning receiver for the Super Hornet and the Tomcat, and that's no good against infrared guided threats.
Mhm.
And so even though you think, well, actually I'm in a Super Hornet or a Tomcat, I'm better off. Maybe actually you are better off in a Bronco, but how do you feel personally about going up against ISIS? Do you have a plan in your head as to what you're going to do if you end up on the ground, having to leave the aeroplane and you end up on the
Sure.
ground?
Yeah, we absolutely did. So one of the really interesting things about the OV-10 is you can land it pretty much anywhere. You can land it on a road. You can land it on in a field, as long as it's pretty level. But it's a pretty rugged. It's a pretty ruggedly designed aircraft. So if we were to get into a situation where we had either a mechanical failure, or we suffered from combat damage, then the plan was to get that aircraft to the friendly side of the forward line of troops as quickly as possible. So the idea of uh, going down in enemy territory was I think a little bit more bleak than ejecting out of an F-18 into maybe Afghanistan or Iraq, where there were probably friendly forces somewhere nearby. It was a different battle space, really. One thing that we also had discussed when it came to the survivability piece is the ejection seats were certified and they were, good to go. However, there was some discussion on, hey, are we better off ejecting from the aircraft or are we better off ditching the aircraft? Um, so that was something that was considered, and we also were pretty well armed. So if we were to find ourselves in a situation behind enemy lines, we had more stuff with us than we would have if we were ejecting from an F-18.
Okay.
So,
okay. Tell us about the deployment then.
sure. So we are going to leave on the deployment once we were complete with our training. And I sent you some pictures. It was actually pretty wild how we got there. Um, there was originally some discussion about us trying to get the aircraft craned on to a U.S. aircraft carrier and then just do a deck run and fly them off. That had been done during the Gulf War. That had been flight tested before. And, no better way to travel overseas than on, U.S. sovereign soil. I've done that plenty of times. The timing for all that didn't work out. So we actually craned the aircraft into a cargo hold of a commercial ship out of Naval Base Norfolk. We brought the aircraft over to Rota, Spain, craned them off, and towed them up to the airfield in Rota, Spain, and then flew across the Mediterranean in through northern Iraq to the area that we were based out of while we were over there. And we're going to do the same thing on the way back. That's how we're going to get the aircraft in and out of theater, which, as you can imagine, was not a small undertaking. But it was great. All the people we worked with, all the support we got, enabled us to get into theater. So when we were in theater, we primarily flew at night, just based on several factors really. One of the factors was the heat. So we talked with the folks that we were supporting, and we said, hey, we can fly during the day. However, due to the temperatures and the computer systems and everything else, we may be better off flying at night. And they said, hey, that's great. We have other platforms that can fly during the day. You guys fly at night. So we would fly 6 days on, 1 day off, and we would cover basically 8 hours of ISR support and then any kinetic fires that had to take place during that time. So we were contributing to the overall big picture mission, but then also having this unique capability to take out targets that some of the other platforms that were over there may not have had the ability to take or to go against. I'm just going to refer to my notes real quick here, so I can talk about a few more of the combat things. I'll talk about the people real quick. We had an incredible group of people that trained with us. It ended up being 3 pilots, 3 WIZOs. We had 2 intelligence personnel, 2 comms technicians who worked on all of our mission systems. We had 3 ordnance personnel who built our rockets, loaded our gun, loaded our ALE-47, and then we had 2 contract mechanics who were really just jack of all trades and kept those aircraft, running smooth the entire time. One other unique aspect of this was we cross-trained everybody so that everybody could basically help out with anything. So I actually got ordnance certified to load rockets, to load the gun. Again, going back to that forward operating mindset of, hey, if we're going for 2 weeks to a forward base to support a mission, we may show up and they might airdrop a pallet of 50 cal and a pallet of rockets and a pallet of laser guidance kits. We need to know how to build those. We need to know how to load them and subsequently employ them. So we got cross-trained and all that. On our day off, everybody would work together to change tires, wash the airplanes, groom the systems on that one day that we were able to take off. So we were able to get into a pretty good rhythm during the 5-month period that we were forward deployed.
So another nerdy question then. So you
Mhm.
flew at night, and obviously you didn't necessarily know that's what you were going to be doing until quite late in the day.
Mhm.
No pun intended. But did you? So the airplane's grey. Did you give consideration to repainting it? And I'm wondering, ISIS are bringing in these advanced surface to air, well, manpads, surface to
Mhm.
missile but manpads from Syria. Did they have night vision equipment? One of the things you talk to guys about all the time is flying combat, and
Mhm.
they have to light the burner, and then all of a sudden the ground erupts because now they can see where you are. But at night, there's some sanctuary there from small
Right.
arms fire and AAA. Uh, did you have the same sanctuary then flying at night in that theater against ISIS?
Sure. So, definitely with the visual signature, we did. One other big advantage of a turboprop aircraft is you're putting out much less heat than you are a fighter aircraft, even not an afterburner. So obviously, no afterburner capability in the OV10, but the heat signature we had determined was relatively low, and there were certain things we were able to do to maintain standoff again with a good sensor, and factoring in the wind, the environmentals, everything else to try and keep our sound signature low as possible over areas that we felt were a higher threat.
What about then this 8 hour vulnerability period that you said you're covering? Is
Mhm.
that how does that work? Is that one airplane, one crew? I mean, what's the endurance of the airplane? You've got no
Sure.
air to air
So,
refueling capabilities.
yep,
So,
with the fuel that we were carrying. So we carried one single centerline fuel tank, and then full internal wings, full internal feeds. And what that would provide is, again, there's obviously a distance component for how far we were going. But if you're looking from an endurance capability, the aircraft could remain airborne for about 4.5 hours before we would be at a min fuel state. So what we would do would so that 8 hour window, it would be two aircraft with two different crews that would cover that entire night, and then we would just rotate between the crews that we had. So one crew would essentially man our squadron duty officer, our operations center, if you will, and we were able to communicate with the aircraft. So you would do that for one night while the other two crews flew, and then you would just rotate that. So doing public math, for every 6 fly days, I would fly with the pilot I was crewed up with four of those, and then the other two we would essentially be manning the operations center.
okay. Was it a comfortable aeroplane to do that then? So 4.5 hours doesn't sound like too long, unless it's uncomfortable, I suppose. Then it could feel
Sure.
really long.
It was relatively comfortable. You had more room in the cockpit, basically above your seat line, than you would in a fighter jet. Um, and due to the fact that our gear was similar, but we were able to customize it a little bit more, and we had more room to store different things that we would need, just based on a little bit larger of a cockpit. So relatively comfortable. I'd say 4.5 hours. That's you would start to get a little bit uncomfortable, but in the Tomcat and the Hornet with air refueling capability, I mean, you know not routinely, but we flew 8 hour missions. I think the average was usually 7 or 7.5 hours when I was flying off the carrier on previous deployments.
Wow.
Uh, so four is definitely a little bit easier than seven.
Can you describe then some of your missions? Are there ones, well, do any stand out in your mind? You know,
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we determined we were pretty good at with the laser guided rockets was going against ISIS checkpoints. So ISIS had set up quite a few checkpoints around the city, and due to our standoff with the laser guided rockets, as well as our ability to shoot multiple rockets with certain spacing, and our ability to reattack quickly, um, we were able to take out checkpoints on a regular basis. Um, Usually, we would our first salvo would be two. So we would shoot two at a checkpoint. We would assess the damage. If there were any personnel or vehicles that left, we would quickly reattack and take those out. So I don't think we'll ever really know, what ISIS thought of our checkpoint destruction, but it all happened pretty quickly and it was pretty violent. So we felt pretty good about that. One of the other missions that I was not a part of, but really tells the story of the the systems tying everything together, was there had been some persistent fire coming from, we'll just say it was north of Mosul, and other aircraft had reported it. Nobody was really sure what the caliber of the rounds were, but they were definitely reports of surface to air fires in the vicinity of this one area, but no one had been able to locate anything. Well, as one of our crews was flying toward that area, the pilot, he sees multiple flashes coming from the ground in the vicinity of where the fire had been reported. He tells the Wizzo, "Hey, I'm taking your FLIR for a second." He gets his helmet mounted sight. He designates on where he thought the fire was coming. And this is from pretty far away. And he said, "Hey, I want you to zoom out on your FLIR and see if you're able to find anything." So he was scanning the area now on the MX-15, and all of a sudden he sees a pickup truck back out from a parking garage, and a guy shoots rounds up into the air, and then they pull it back into the parking garage. So he said, "I got it." So they pass all that information to leadership, and within about 10 minutes, they put three laser guided rockets into the parking garage
Wow.
and took out that AAA piece that was just mounted in the back of the truck.
Wow.
Um, so it's pretty wild, because you think to yourself, okay, cool, we have, you know, a pilot sees something, he designates it, the Wizzo starts scanning, and ISIS was probably like, "Hey, how the heck did they find us?" Because their tactic was to back out, shoot up at noise, and then pull back in so that they couldn't be detected. And I'm guessing that they probably changed their tactics, but we didn't see any fire coming from that location afterward. So if any of those guys are still alive, they're probably guessing how we did it.
Did you have much time sensitive tasking like that then? I mean, that's one, I guess, where you create your own TST, but was there a lot? You talked earlier about how you had the SATCOM capability. You could send and receive video and talk to, I guess, whoever you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
What typically did a mission look like? Was it always going to be pre-planned? You knew where you were going to go. How dynamic was
Sure.
it?
So it was very dynamic, and we did some work with pre-planned targets, and we also integrated um, with conventional assets. So we routinely would be integrated with Strike Eagles, F-16s, and actually some of our buddies who were flying off of the aircraft carrier that was in the Gulf at the time. They were also supporting ISIS, or not supporting ISIS. They were supporting missions against ISIS. Um, so we were able to communicate with those guys, and some of the pre-planned missions were, terrain denial, or there would be reports of, enemy equipment or enemy AAA pieces that they would go after, and we would be a part of that. Um, and some of the Navy platforms specifically, we were good at providing bomb damage assessment to anybody with our SATCOM capability. So Hornets could come in, or Strike Eagles could come in, and they could drop their bombs. We would essentially have our sensor in that area and be able to give that real time
Wow.
um, to leadership with that capability. Um, One other very interesting mission that we were on, there was reports of AAA pieces in a field, and JDAM was dropped on it by a couple different platforms. And the best way I can describe the aftermath of that was like, if you have if you're going to make biscuits and you have all your dough laid out on a cookie sheet, and you go through with the circular biscuit maker, and then remove all the biscuits, that's what it looked like, because the JDAM hit in the exact location, and there, it was essentially it was like a crop circle that was remaining. Well, the AAA piece was was inside of one of the areas that the JDAM had not hit. So we rolled in with an APKWS and destroyed it.
Wow.
So yeah, so that was pretty wild.
How did you deconflict, or who deconflicted you then? So if you've got these other platforms in theater, you could, if you take the example of it's probably a bad example, but if you take the example of the guy in the parking garage with his AAA piece reversing in and out,
Mm-hmm.
You could have come and dropped a JDAM on that. Someone else could have hit it. Who decided when you were going to be used, and were you coordinating with any facts? What sort of
Yeah,
integration did
so
you have?
we were coordinating essentially with an operations center who we had a JTAC, or a joint terminal air controller, who was stationed there, and he would work the approvals, he would work the deconfliction from other assets that may be in the area, so that we could employ kinetically against those threats.
You also talked earlier about being co-located then with, some of the customers. How much of an impact then did that have? Are there things that you can talk about in terms of the evolution of your working relationship with those
Mhm.
people? Initially, trying to figure out what each other wanted, and then getting to a point of symbiosis at the end of it where you could
Sure.
kind of knew. And is that a story you can tell? I mean,
So very broadly, there was some integration that took place, and all of it was positive. However, what we had trained to was not exactly what was going on in theater at the time. So specifically, um, our capacity was not to, like, we did not have a massive ground force presence where we were supporting uh, U.S. forces on the ground going against a specific enemy. Um, had we at a different time, so I think Afghanistan is probably a good example of this, and this is actually where, Star Baby, I'm sure, mentioned, this is where a lot of these ideas were born from, is what was going on in Afghanistan, where we did have friendly forces engaging enemy forces on the ground. If we had been in Afghanistan 7 or 8 years earlier, then absolutely being co-located with those forces would have had that uh, synergy that I had mentioned. Um, and I think there's still a ton of goodness in it. We did not see that the highest levels that we could have imagined in our combat deployment, based on the nature of the combat. Um, However, if that had changed, we would have been prepared to do that. We were certified to do it, and I'm very confident that we would have achieved those goals,
yeah. What were your
because we sure
reflect?
saw it in training.
Yeah. What were your reflections then? What did you conclude? I mean, so the first question I should really ask, just back up one, is how long were you there for? How many sorties did you fly? Before
Sure.
we then talk about what your conclusions were, but
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we were there for 5 months. We flew a total of 134 sorties, 120 of which were combat missions, and we employed, let's see, over 60 advanced precision kill weapons system units, or those laser guided rockets, during the time that we were there.
yeah.
So um, I think it was pretty impactful as, as an experimental program that was given the opportunity to showcase these things in combat.
Did it feel like you were doing something that was experimental? I mean, how eh, I had asked you earlier whether or not you looked at it, the Super Hornet, and then you looked at the Bronco, and that were anticipating that you'd have to do things differently, and whether there were any inherent limitations in one or the other. and it sounds to me like you thought it was fantastic. So did it feel like you were taking part in something that was experimental? Did you get to a point where it became routine and very comfortable, and it felt weird that actually you were conducting an experiment?
Sure. Um, it definitely did. Or we definitely got to the point where we were very comfortable with what we were doing, based on the number of missions and having a very specific mission set. Our proficiency was definitely pretty incredible. I think towards the end of the deployment, and the reality of it is we ran out of rockets. So um, this goes into some of my takeaways, which were we had been funded and supported to conduct the experiment. The experiment was deemed to have concluded, and we said, okay, well, if you guys want us to stay, we need more stuff. And the decision was made at a much higher level than me. Um, nope, we're good. You guys have proven the capability. We have the data that we need, and we were essentially sent back home from that.
Okay.
So I definitely think we accomplished something. Um, it's tough when you look at something that is experimental and what the follow-on options are for that. We had, the U.S. military has a lot of competing priorities, and I don't I don't think everyone saw what we were doing as moving the ball forward from a capability standpoint, as far as acquisitions, as far as what we're going to put funding into.
Hmm.
Um, this capability is not something that is going to defeat China. Um, it is not a great power weapon. However, my personal opinion on it is for the for the low cost of what we were able to provide, um, having this type of capability is a great insurance policy on being a part of a counterinsurgency or irregular warfare or supporting partner forces. And I think that is a debate that should happen and should continue, which is, hey, for a relatively small cost, maintaining some capability where we don't need to bring uh, a fighter jet that costs 18 to $30,000 a flight hour to defeat an enemy who is not, I don't necessarily want to say sticks and stones, um, but as a comparison, it's not a peer-to-peer threat. Having something like this, I personally think is much more cost effective. And
Yeah.
that was our argument for having this capability.
I think I'm correct, and I'm sure people you will tell me if I'm wrong, but also people in the comments will tell me if I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure they deployed F-22s to drop JDAMs on stuff. I mean, I think F-22 is
Yep.
$50,000 a flight hour. I don't know what the F-35 is, but F-35 is out in Syria doing the same thing.
Right.
And you do have to look at the economics of it and wonder whether or not there's a better way. So I get that. What did you think then? What? So okay, I'm going to ask two questions. So I'll ask the
Sure.
first question first, and then I'll come back to you about sort of your overall impression specifically of this configuration and this aeroplane and its applicability to the mission. Um, One thing we didn't really talk about at the beginning, and there is some sensitivity around this, and I'm not going to ask you to get into that, but
Mhm.
but it started off, let's say, with Star Baby birthing this idea of Combat Dragon 2. He's Air Force, you're Navy.
Mhm.
Was this a joint thing? Was the Navy working with the Air Force to share its experimental findings? Was it a joint program in any way? How did it go from being an Air Force thing to a Navy thing, and was it shared?
Sure. So at the time that I was there, and I definitely want your viewers, your listeners to realize that anything I heard was secondhand. So I didn't experience it real time, but I know that on a previous program called Imminent Fury that was uh, that was worked on in around the 2008 to 2010 timeframe, that program was joint. And through a a series of things that were outside of their control, uh, but were affected by the aircraft that they had chosen, which was a foreign built aircraft, the A-29 Super Tucano, as well as the loss of some of their advocacy inside the Joint Force. That program was essentially shut down, I believe, in 2010. So that was a joint program. I think as specific individuals tried to move the ball forward, they just had different ways of going about it. And based on where people were stationed, based on the people they were working with, and based on whose ear they were able to get to say, hey, we can do it this way. I think that's why it was a specific, a Navy focused effort for what I became a part of. Now, what I can tell you I did do is that I briefed the results as well as some of the other teammates that I was with. We briefed it to a joint audience, through CENTCOM to folks in the Pentagon. And then when there was an effort to start Combat Dragon 3, I shared everything that we had learned with folks at ACC, um, to make sure that they did not learn some of the same lessons that we had learned through this process. So I was very forward sharing that information with those guys, um, again, to help make better informed decisions as they try to get this capability fielded.
Well, you will, touch wood, it's planned, you will come back for episode 4 of this light attack series, and you and Starbaby will, as a duo, discuss Combat Dragon 3. So I'm sure we'll get into some more of the detail behind that at that point. But
Yep.
briefly or broadly, then, what were you saying then about Combat Dragon 2? What had you learned? What lessons were you thinking we don't want to have to relearn those at some point in the future?
Sure. One of the lessons we learned was um, having having the right logistical tail. So um, it also became very, like, a lot of people really like to focus on the aircraft itself. We were trying to focus on the capability because the feasibility of reopening the OV-10 Bronco line really isn't there. Um, and if you were to open a new line, uh, it would be extremely expensive. And obviously, you would want it to be more modern from the beginning. But we were looking at the characteristics of a good light attack aircraft, the weapons that were associated with them. And because we only had the two aircraft, we had to come up with more or less our own logistics. I'd mentioned earlier, we got parts from Cal Fire. Some of the parts on these aircraft came from museums. Some of the
Wow.
systems that were integrated were uh, repurposed from other platforms. I think the AAR-47 system was taken from uh, a decommissioned helicopter squadron, and these boxes were just sitting in Pax River. So um, building something from scratch, while relatively inexpensive when we got it out there, we really sold everything on this deployment. And for us to continue to do that, we would need support. We need a logistical tail. We would need a training pipeline. We would need all of those things. So something like this really does have to come to a conclusion before you can not necessarily build something from scratch, but build something that is sustainable. Um, so we definitely had some challenges with logistics. Um, Other lessons learned are, we talked a little bit about the weapons piece. So um, obviously we can't go back in time, but if I were to be a part of a program again and we were feeling perceived pressure to deploy, and we said, okay, well, what are we going to deploy with in 6 months? We have to pick something. I think it's worth having the discussion of, hey, is it worth, what's a better choice? Going now with not the full capability of weapons, because we don't know how the battle is going to change. Or do we want to flight test everything and deploy in 12 months? And I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's worth, I would want to have that conversation. And I would use the example of the 250-pound JDAM laser guided bomb versus the 50 cal, because if we had chosen differently, this could be a completely different story.
Mm.
Um,
Did you
so
did you have
yeah, go ahead.
any learnings in terms of employing the aeroplane? I mean, I would imagine that by that point, the Air Force and the Navy and the Marine Corps have been doing close air support and FAC-A for so long. I mean, 2001, October 2001, I think, the Navy Tomcats are out over
Mhm.
Afghanistan. The Bold Tigers, the Strike Eagle guys deployed in maybe late October, early November. I mean, it just had been going for a really long time by that point. And I kind of imagine that you would have all these things down pat. You would know about, spins and tactics and techniques and procedures and all those
Sure.
sort of things. Did light attack change that? Did it mean that actually you could do things differently, and there were learnings that you could pass on around just employment?
Yes. So there were definitely some lessons learned on employment of the APKWS. Um, we, I believe it was one of the first missions that we did. Um, we shot a couple, and they didn't hit the target, and we went back and looked at it and had to, go to the diagrams and say, okay, what was the flight path angle, the release airspeed, all these different things, and it turns out that, excuse me, the aircraft was just a little bit outside of the basket for that weapon to detect the laser energy. So that was very early on in our combat operations. So we went back to the drawing board. We re we basically redid our employment parameters so that we mitigated the possibility of that happening again, and it did. And we were successful with the laser guided rockets after that. Those were also some lessons that we passed on to other platforms that were starting to carry laser guided rockets. We just said, hey, here are some considerations that you guys should factor in. So we definitely passed those lessons learned on from the actual weapons delivery.
Okay. Do you think? I mean, it sounds like a strange question, and maybe it is to ask, having described the Bronco as being rugged and robust and having this
Mhm.
hydraulic system and that isn't on all the time, and there being redundancy and
Yep,
and so on and so forth. I just wonder, from your perspective, what is the most important? Is it the mission systems? Is it the platform? Where's the balance there? And what did you come
sure.
away thinking about that?
So they're obviously both important. I think if you have an incredible mission system on the wrong platform, you're going to miss out on capability. And I think vice versa. You could have the best platform without the corresponding mission system, and it's not going to be as effective. So I think the real beauty in doing this is trying to combine the two. Um, and then you get into the question of like, okay, well, what's the mission? And without picking aircraft, there are light attack aircraft out there that have a low wing, which would reduce visibility for the aircrew. Now, how important is that? It depends on your audience. It depends on your background. Um, there are limitations with a high wing aircraft as well, and I think all those things need to be factored in. We just happen to be in this very unique position where we were flying an aircraft that was designed for visual close air support. It had a cargo bay in it that we could put all sorts of stuff. We could put all of these computer racks. You look at other aircraft, they may be limited not by technology but by the space for it.
Hmm.
um, so I think if you're building a purpose built aircraft from the ground up, you need to factor in both of those things. um, then also the ability to change it, because you don't know what you're going to need next year when it comes to mission systems. So I would say a platform that is easily modifiable without it having to go into years of flight tests to field it. And the OV10 just happened to be that platform where we could put any computer inside the cargo bay, and it's not going to change the flight care. It's not going to change anything other than the weight and balance
Hmm.
of the aircraft. You don't have to put it through wind tunnel testing or anything like that. So I would be a big air advocate rather for something versatile that is easily modifiable, that when a new technology, a new computer, a new sensor, a new system comes out, you can put that in an aircraft. Um, so hopefully that kind of answers the mail on that question when it comes to platform and mission.
It does, yeah. I think it's evident that they're both important. I guess I wondered as a sort of wizzo whether you sort of just had more of an affinity for the mission systems and therefore would prioritize those. So I understand the
Yeah.
argument you have to have both, and it's interesting
Yes,
to hear you talk
absolutely.
about having a platform, but no mission systems means no capability, and the relationship between those two things to create
Right.
capability. That's an interesting observation. So
And one thing that I thought of to expound on that real quickly is it's not just the mission systems we're using. It is if you're supporting guys on the ground and they get a new capability, you need to be able to integrate with that new capability.
mm,
So whether it's a radio, whether it's a sensor that they're using, uh, sharing data, communicating, whatever it may be, um, if they have something they say, hey, we got this new thing, is there a way for you to integrate it and provide situational awareness? We want the answer to be yes.
yeah.
Instead of, oh, hey, sorry, this platform's already built and you need to put that request into the Pentagon and it'll go into the 5 year plan and maybe in 10 years we'll have something. Um, we were able to do stuff like within a couple of weeks. And having a platform where you can update the mission system is really what that's all about.
That's an interesting question. I think one of the criticisms of military acquisition programs in general is that they buy proprietary systems and they're tied in then to that manufacturer. You look
Mm-hmm.
at making software changes to an OFP as an example. You're going to have to pay through the nose to get somebody to do
Sure.
that, and I think F-35 was supposed to sort of unshackle customers in some respects. I'm not convinced that it has. I think there's still a dependency on the manufacturer. But but
Right.
but from a light attack perspective, then you were obviously in an experimental phase where scale wasn't an issue. You could go to the manufacturer, the mission system designers, and work with their engineers to iron out the bugs. Would that have been an open well, I don't know if it's the correct term, sort of an open platform or an open source platform. I guess it wouldn't have been, but would it have meant that you could go to any developer and say, okay, we've got the software, we have the source code for it, you need to develop it and change it for us? Or were you going to be tied into the company that made the systems for Combat Dragon 2? Let's say
Sure.
you've gone somewhere with it. Let's say the
Right.
Navy or the Air Force has said, "Hey, this is great. Yeah, we'll actually buy this." Where would you have ended
So
up?
we did not have a lot of handcuffs on us, and we had some really smart people who knew some of the systems that were essentially the best in breed of whatever it was we were looking to integrate. Um, so when it comes to like the computer racks or just the hardware, we had some comms guys who were like, hey, this is already certified for flight. We mount it, we can rack mount it. It's not going to, do anything weird when it's airborne in an unpressurized cockpit. Um, so we should use this. We said, okay, sounds good. We use that. Okay, well, you know, what's something already available that is going to meet our needs? Oh, the Scorpion helmet mounted queuing system. Okay, is there a way to integrate that with our mission computers? Yeah, there is. This is how we do it. Okay, great. Now it's integrated. Hey, can we integrate the MX-15? Yeah, we sure can. Okay, sounds good. Let's do that. Um, Same thing with the radios and different interfaces. We just partnered with really smart people who said, to do what you want to do, these are the things you need, and this is how you do it. And we got stuff from lots of different companies. We did not have our hands tied through like a bureaucratic system where, hey, you have to buy this box. And if we said, hey, that doesn't really meet our needs, if it didn't meet our needs, we didn't buy it. We were not handcuffed to purchase specific stuff. We were able to get what we needed, and as long as it passed certification and as long as it was airworthy, we were good to go. One thing I would like to talk about that allowed us to iterate on our mission system was, and I think this is what holds back some more modern platforms, is when everything is integrated into the safety of flight and navigation system of an aircraft, anytime you modify something, it has to be looked at, because if adding a JDAM to an F-18 messes with your uh, your navigation or some other system, they've got to test that. Because we used commercial off-the-shelf Garmin systems for navigation and safety of flight, that was a proven certified system that was good to go. We put it in and it was good. We could modify our mission system as much as we wanted because it didn't affect the flight clearance or the airworthiness of that aircraft. Um, and that's something that I think was a huge takeaway, because we were able to iterate so quickly. We were able to make improvements to the mission system, and we didn't have to re-go through airworthiness testing.
Can I just give you a hypothetical then on that? So you take a commercial off the shelf component. It's not really a hypothetical. It's a practical question. If you look at what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, Russia
Mm-hmm.
doing vast amounts of GPS jamming. If you're using a commercial off the shelf, and even if you can route that through, let's say, a military grade GPS where you've got the encrypted good
Mm-hmm.
quality GPS that's coming from the military, that's allowed for the military use. But let's make the assumption that's being jammed. What's your redundancy with a system like that then? One of the things that you hear, even on my Discord channel, we've got a couple of guys who fly commercial airlines, and they talk
Mm-hmm.
about flying over Iran and getting pull-up warnings and jip whiz warnings, even though they're at 30,000 feet, because the airplane doesn't know where it is. It thinks it's over mountains or whatever. So those commercial systems are vulnerable. Does I guess the question I'm asking in a very roundabout way is does buying commercial off the shelf mean that you are vulnerable to those sorts of things then? Is that the cost benefit equation then, that you get something that works, that doesn't have to be integrated, that doesn't have to be flight tested with every change, but
Mm-hmm.
makes you vulnerable in other respects?
Yeah, I absolutely think it does. Um, if you know, if we had been flying where there had been GPS jamming, then our navigation system would have not worked. If it was jamming any Garmin, then it would have jammed our Garmin. Now, we obviously had procedures and plans for if you were to lose your navigation system, we had backup plans for that. But as far as something sustainable, if we're in an environment, and I would say GPS jamming is much more significant now than it was 10 years ago, then that is absolutely something that would have to be factored in. And you might be handcuffed to, hey, uh, we have to have an integrated system that can uh, counter this jamming tactic. Otherwise, you'd be dead in the water. So definitely all really interesting stuff to consider.
Final question, then, Hanky, and I'll let you go,
Mhm.
because we're short on time, and I don't want to take the mickey because I do want you to come back. But can you talk a little bit about crew competence, the accessibility, and the ability to take these sorts of mission systems and employ them without having huge amounts of experience? I mean, I noticed you were very experienced at the point at which you became part of this program. I'm assuming the other Wizzos and pilots were the same. Uh, One of the applications for light attack is a foreign air force,
Mhm.
where maybe they don't do the hour building that you can afford to do if you're in the U.S. Air Force or U.S. Navy. Um, how accessible are the mission systems of something like Combat Dragon 2 to somebody who's just not that experienced?
Sure. So you could not do what we did without highly experienced people. Um, we were given decision making down to the lowest level to get systems working, to make decisions on what we were going to put into the aircraft. It was an incredible amount of trust across the board, and you could not have done that without highly experienced people. So what we did is a little bit different, I think, than the fielding of a light attack force um, for partner forces. So I think while Combat Dragon 2 moved the ball forward for light attack, it gave um, it gave a lot of data. Specifically, what we did could not translate to training somebody without a lot of experience in another platform. Um, I think when you're talking, training partner forces, it's a very different set of skills. You would have to start very, very basic, and you definitely wouldn't be doing some of the things that we were doing without the logistical tail, having to make things up on the fly as part of an experiment. Um, I think you could field an effective light attack force, maybe just not with all the stuff that we did that was a little bit beyond your basics.
Okay. Well, that has been fascinating. Thank you. I was talking to you before we hit record, and I'd said to you I don't generally do any research, not as a mark of
Yeah.
disrespect, because I don't want to um, prejudice or bias where I'm going to go with the interview. I just want it to be an organic thing and a conversation between two people, and I just ask questions as they occur to me.
Mhm.
And when I came to do a bit of research on this, because I thought I better have some basic understanding of what Combat Dragon is. I found there wasn't very much written. I mean, TWZ, the Warzone, as usual, had done a fantastic job of writing up some
Mhm.
information about this program, but I don't think really, maybe a couple of other media outlets had a few pieces, but there was really nothing of any substance on Combat
Mhm.
Dragon 2. And now there is. So thank you so much for coming on the channel to describe your experiences deploying with the aeroplane and your thoughts and conclusions around it. Really looking forward to seeing you and Star Baby talk about Combat Dragon 3 in episode 4. Thanks, Hanky.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Steve. Appreciate it.